At a family brunch, my parents casually announced that my brother would be moving into my spare room. I just let them talk. They had no idea I'd moved weeks ago. When he showed up with boxes, ringing the doorbell, no one responded. I, 32M, was cutting into my pancakes when my mother made the announcement that changed everything. We were at the usual Sunday brunch spot, the kind of place where families pretend everything is perfect while passive-aggressively destroying each other between mimosas and eggs Benedict. My mother looked directly at me with that smile she reserves for delivering unwelcome news, informing me that my younger brother would be moving into my spare bedroom next week. Not asking, telling. My father nodded approvingly, mentioning how it made perfect sense since I lived alone in that big house anyway, and family should help family during tough times. I kept chewing my pancakes, tasting nothing. My brother sat there looking sheepish but entitled, the way he always did when our parents swooped in to solve his problems. He mumbled something about his lease being up and needing somewhere temporary to land while he figured things out. Again, the thing is, I'd heard this story before. 3 years ago, it was his startup failing. 2 years before that, his girlfriend kicking him out. Each time, our parents had orchestrated these little family meetings where my resources became communal property. My spare room, my couch, my patience, my money, all fair game for their golden boy who couldn't seem to keep his life together past his 28th birthday. But this time was different. This time, I'd been expecting it. I took another bite and told them it sounded fine. My mother beamed, praising me for being such a good older brother. My father started talking about how this would be great for both of us, how my brother could help around the house, maybe contribute to utilities. My brother visibly relaxed, probably already mentally arranging his gaming setup in my spare room. What none of them knew was that I'd closed on a new place 3 weeks ago. A sleek apartment across town, minimal furniture, maximum distance from family drama. I'd been planning this move for months, carefully timing everything. The old house sat empty now, utilities transferred to my name elsewhere, my mail forwarded to a P.O. box. The conversation moved on to other topics, my mother's book club, my father's golf game, my brother's latest job interview that he was really confident about this time. I participated just enough to seem normal, all while imagining what would happen in a few days when my brother showed up with his boxes and his expectations. After brunch, my mother hugged me extra tight, whispering how proud she was that I always stepped up for family. My father clapped my shoulder, mentioning something about building character. My brother gave me an awkward side hug, promising he'd be the best roommate ever and wouldn't be any trouble. I drove home to my new apartment and spent the evening setting up my home office. Every piece of furniture I arranged felt like another step away from the family dynamic that had defined my adult life. For the first time in years, I was making decisions purely for myself. The days leading up to his planned move were surreal. My mother called twice to discuss logistics. What time he should arrive, whether I needed her to bring anything for the spare room, if I wanted her to cook dinner for his first night. I gave vague responses, letting her plan away while I finished unpacking in my new space. My brother texted me a few times too, asking about internet passwords and whether I had a good coffee maker. Each message was another reminder of his assumptions, his casual entitlement to my space and resources. I responded minimally, telling him we'd figure it out when he got there. The morning finally arrived. I woke up in my new bedroom, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and checked my phone. My mother had sent a text bright and early, saying she was helping my brother pack and they'd probably arrive around 2 in the afternoon. She included a heart emoji and mentioned how excited she was that her boys would be living together again. I made coffee in my new kitchen and settled in to wait. The first text came at 2:15 p.m. My brother, saying he was outside and asking why I wasn't answering the door. I didn't respond. At 2:30, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message asking if everything was okay, mentioning that my brother was at the house but couldn't reach me. Her voice had that edge it gets when her perfectly laid plans hit unexpected obstacles. By 3 p.m., my brother was calling. Then my father. Then my mother again. I silenced my phone and took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away years of being voluntold into family obligations. The real entertainment started around 4 p.m. when the texts began flooding in. My brother wrote that he'd been ringing the doorbell for over an hour. He was asking neighbors if they'd seen me. He wanted to know if I'd gotten into an accident or something. The progression from confusion to concern to irritation played out in real time across my phone screen. My mother's messages were more frantic. She was asking if I was at work, if there was an emergency, why I wasn't responding to anyone. She mentioned that my brother was standing in the driveway with all his belongings, looking pathetic, and neighbors were starting to stare. My father's contribution was typically direct. He texted that this was unacceptable behavior, that family commitments weren't optional, and that I needed to get home immediately to let my brother in. The military precision of his disappointment came through clearly, even in text form. But I wasn't home. I was 20 minutes away, sitting in my new living room, watching their carefully constructed plan crumble through my phone screen. Around 5:30, my brother tried calling one more time. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail that started confused and ended angry. He couldn't understand where I was, why I wasn't responding, why I was doing this to him. He mentioned that some of his stuff was temperature sensitive and he needed to get inside soon. The entitlement never wavered, even in crisis. My mother called again at 6 p.m., her voice sharp with frustration when she hit my voicemail. She informed me that my brother was going to have to get a hotel room for the night, that this was causing everyone stress, and that I'd better have a very good explanation for disappearing on such an important day. That's when I knew it was time for my reveal. I called my brother back at 6:45 p.m., just as the sun was starting to set. He answered immediately, his voice tight, with barely controlled anger mixed with relief. He launched into a rant about where I'd been, how worried everyone was, how he'd been standing outside like an idiot all afternoon. He demanded to know what kind of emergency could possibly justify leaving him stranded with all his possessions. I let him finish his tirade before calmly explaining that there was no emergency. I told him I'd been at my new apartment across town, the one I'd moved into 3 weeks ago. I mentioned that the old house had been empty this whole time, that I'd forgotten to mention my move at brunch last Sunday. The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds. When he found his voice again, he asked what I meant about a new apartment. I explained that I'd bought a place, moved out, started fresh. I told him the old house was actually going on the market next week, that I'd been meaning to mention it to everyone. He asked why I hadn't said anything at brunch. I reminded him that he and our parents had been so focused on announcing his living arrangements that I hadn't found a good moment to bring up my own housing situation. I'd assumed someone would ask about my plans eventually. The conversation devolved quickly from there. He accused me of deliberately sabotaging him, of knowing exactly what I was doing when I sat quietly through that brunch. He was right, of course, but I didn't confirm it. Instead, I expressed surprise that no one had thought to actually ask me about the arrangement before announcing it publicly. When he hung up on me, I knew the real fireworks were about to begin. My mother called within minutes, her voice shaking with a mixture of confusion and fury. She wanted to know how I could let my brother stand outside all day when I knew he couldn't get in. She demanded an explanation for why I'd moved without telling anyone, why I'd let them make all these plans around a house I no longer lived in. I explained calmly that I'd purchased a new place because I wanted more independence. I mentioned that I'd been planning the move for months, that it had nothing to do with anyone else. When she asked why I hadn't mentioned it at brunch, I reminded her that the conversation had been entirely focused on my brother's needs, not my living situation. She tried a different approach, asking if my brother could stay in the new apartment instead. I told her it was a one-bedroom place, that I'd specifically chosen it for the space and privacy. When she suggested he could sleep on the couch temporarily, I explained that I'd bought the smallest couch possible, deliberately choosing form over function. My father called next, his voice carrying that disappointed authority that had shaped my childhood. He informed me that my behavior was selfish and immature, that family meant making sacrifices for each other. He wanted to know what had gotten into me, why I was suddenly prioritizing myself over family obligations. I listened to his lecture about duty and responsibility, about how my brother was going through a rough patch and needed support. When he finished, I asked him a simple question. Why hadn't anyone asked if I was available to help before announcing that I would? That seemed to catch him off guard. He mentioned that they'd assumed I'd be willing, that I'd always been willing before. I acknowledged that was true. I had always been willing before. But I pointed out that willingness and availability were different things, and that major life decisions usually involve some discussion with the people affected. The conversation ended with him telling me we'd discuss this properly as a family once everyone had calmed down. But I wasn't planning on any family discussions. I'd spent too many years being voluntold into situations that benefited everyone except me. The spare room that became my brother's gaming den. The family dinners where I provided the location and the cleanup. The emergency loans that became permanent gifts. The emotional labor of managing everyone else's crises while my own needs went unacknowledged. Over the next few days, the family group chat became a battlefield. My mother tried guilt, reminding me of all the times the family had supported me. My father attempted authority, demanding I explain my actions at a family meeting. My brother oscillated between self-pity and anger, describing his hotel expenses and the stress of apartment hunting on short notice. I participated minimally, acknowledging their messages without engaging with the drama. When my mother asked directly if I planned to help my brother find somewhere to live, I reminded her that he was a grown adult with internet access and a functioning phone. When my father demanded to know what kind of son abandons family in their time of need, I pointed out that no one had abandoned anyone. I'd simply moved to a new address without providing advance notice. The breaking point came when my brother showed up at my new apartment building. The doorman called up to announce a visitor, and I could hear my brother in the background arguing about family emergency access. I told the doorman I wasn't expecting any visitors and wouldn't be coming down. My brother's texts from the lobby were increasingly frantic. He couldn't understand how I'd become so cold, so selfish, so different from the brother he'd always known. He accused me of planning this whole thing as some kind of revenge, of deliberately hurting him for no reason. He was partially right about the planning, but wrong about the reason. This wasn't revenge, it was boundary setting. This was me finally prioritizing my own needs over the family's expectation that I'd always be available as their problem solver and resource provider. When my mother called that evening, crying about how the family was falling apart, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete calm. She begged me to reconsider, to find some way to help my brother, to not let this destroy our family relationships. I explained to her gently that I wasn't destroying anything. I was simply living my own life in my own space, making decisions based on my own needs and preferences. I mentioned that this was generally considered normal adult behavior, not family betrayal. She asked what had changed, why I was suddenly so different. I told her nothing had changed about me. I'd simply stopped automatically saying yes to requests I was never actually given the opportunity to decline. The revelation seemed to hit her then. She realized that for years, family meetings about my resources had been announcements, not discussions. She'd been so focused on solving problems efficiently that she'd never noticed I wasn't actually part of the decision-making process. But the realization came too late. I'd already built my new life, established my new boundaries, created my new normal. The family dynamic that had defined us for years was broken, and I wasn't interested in repairing it. Update 1. 2 weeks later, my brother finally found an apartment. It was smaller than he wanted, more expensive than he preferred, and required him to actually complete a rental application process instead of just moving into a predetermined space. My mother mentioned this to me during a tense phone call, clearly expecting me to feel guilty about his struggles. Instead, I congratulated him on his successful apartment hunt and wished him well with the move. The silence on her end spoke volumes. My father attempted one final authority play, calling to inform me that I was expected at Sunday dinner to discuss family expectations and repair damaged relationships. I told him I already had plans for Sunday, which was true. I planned to stay home and enjoy my peaceful apartment. When he asked what those plans were, I explained that I was planning to not attend family dinner. The distinction seemed important. Update 2. 3 months have passed since the doorbell incident. My brother has settled into his new place, and, from what I hear through family updates, is actually thriving with the independence. My parents have adapted to planning family gatherings that don't automatically include my resources or my space. I've attended a few family events, but on my own terms. I arrive when I want, leave when I'm ready, and contribute what I choose rather than what's expected. The dynamic feels foreign to everyone, but it's slowly becoming the new normal. The most significant change is in how my family communicates with me. They actually ask now before making plans that involve me. They check my availability before announcing my participation. They treat me like an autonomous adult rather than a family resource to be allocated. Sometimes I wonder if I could have achieved this shift through direct conversation rather than strategic absence. But I know myself well enough to recognize that I tried direct conversation for years. I'd expressed my needs, set verbal boundaries, requested consideration, all of which had been acknowledged and promptly ignored. The doorbell plan worked because it demonstrated rather than declared. It showed the consequences of their assumptions instead of just describing my frustration with them. Sometimes actions speak louder than boundary-setting conversations, especially with people who've become comfortable dismissing your words. My new apartment remains my sanctuary. No family meetings happen here. No crisis management sessions occur in my living room. No one makes announcements about how my space will be utilized for other people's benefit. I wake up each morning in a place that's entirely mine, surrounded by choices I made for myself, living a life designed around my own needs and preferences. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not managing anyone else's emergencies or accommodating anyone else's assumptions. The spare room drama taught me something valuable. Sometimes the most effective way to change a dynamic is to simply stop participating in it. Sometimes the best response to being taken for granted is to become unavailable to be taken. My family learned to function without automatically accessing my resources. My brother learned to solve his own housing problems. My parents learned to ask instead of announce. And I learned that setting boundaries doesn't require extensive explanation or justification. Sometimes it just requires strategic absence and the willingness to let other people experience the consequences of their assumptions. The empty house with the ringing doorbell became a perfect metaphor for our family dynamic. They'd been expecting me to always be there, ready to open the door to whatever they needed, without ever checking if I was actually home or willing to answer. Now they knock first, and I decide whether or not to let them in.